Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to our webinar, Open Source Technologies for ENVI and IDL. My name is Jody Lee and I'll be the moderator on today's webinar. I'm excited to be joined by Zach Norman, Solutions Engineer at Harris. Zach has his master's degree in mechanical engineering and a bachelor's degree in physics, both from the Colorado School of Mines. He has been with Harris for nearly 4 years, providing technical sales support to our customers and prospects. So welcome, Zach.
Thanks, Jody.
Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. I've muted the phone lines for all attendees, so if you have any questions at any point during the webinar, feel free to enter them into the questions chat box, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar, and we'll have that up on our website at harrisgeospatial.com in the next couple of days. We'll also email you a link to the recording as well as the slide deck, and you're welcome to share it with your colleagues. So now I'm going to turn things over to Zach.
Thanks for the introduction, Jody. And thanks for joining us today, everyone, and happy holidays. Today we're going to be talking about open source tools and technologies for ENVI and IDL. With that, if you've never been on one of my online training classes or webinars before, that's me. There's my contact information. As Jody mentioned, as we're going through this, if you have questions, feel free to use the questions box of GoToWebinar. I'll try to keep an eye on that when we get to our demo, so if you have questions while I'm walking through things, I'm happy to elaborate on any of the steps or other things that I cover. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to cover some topics that I think are very exciting. We're going to be talking about open source tools, IDL Python Bridge, the IDL Package Manager, GitHub, and some other things that you'll see once we get to the slides. We're probably going to be at about 40 or 45 minutes today, with maybe about 2/3 of that slides, and then we're going to walk through some live demonstrations showing some of these tools and technologies that we're talking about actually working. So with that, we're just going to have a brief introduction on Harris and what we do. If you're not familiar with who we are, we're Harris Geospatial Solutions. We're a small component of Harris Corporation. We focus more on the imagery, geospatial, analytics side of things. And kind of within that, hopefully most of you are familiar with our core capabilities and products of IDL and ENVI, Starscape, and there's some other technologies that are up there on that slide. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but today we're really going to be focusing mostly on IDL. We're going to talk a little bit about ENVI and how some of these tools for IDL developers and users can be beneficial for you if you are an ENVI user, to make your life easier to pull different packages and other sources of code in. So with that, that's just kind of our quick high-level introduction. So we'll go ahead and get started with our content now. So first thing I just want to start with is a very generic slide about, what is open source? What does that really mean? I think it's important to understand that open source is about much more than just freeware or free software that you can download and use to solve part of a problem. Especially if you are a programmer or a developer, open source software means a lot more. It means you have access to source code. It means that something that you might want to take a look at or work with or change to work just the way you want, you can do that. And you can publish it and make that available to others, or make those changes yourself. And so really with today, open source software is we're going to be talking about sort of the programming side of things, not just freeware or free programs that you can download. And sort of with that, and why I think open source software is really important, is that if you are a developer, it's really great for you. I love open source software because it's something that's really driven by the community and the users that take advantage of those different tools. So with that, power is in your hands. You can go through, you can make changes, you can fix bugs, add different features, and ask to merge that your code into the official branch if something's up on GitHub. So you have a lot of control, and that's where I think open source is really exciting. It's just that you have the ability to rapidly develop and make things fit your needs as you see fit. And so with that, just kind of quickly transitioning, we'll be jumping around a little bit, talking about IDL and open source packages or collections of code that you have. So if you haven't watched our What's New webinar, which was a couple months ago, for IDL 8.7.1, IDL 8.7.1 ships with a new routine called the IDL Package Manager, which lets you go through, create, install, update, and basically pull in code from remote sources so that anybody can easily access or use your tools. You don't have to go to a web page, download it, unpack it, update IDL search path. It does all this for you automatically. And so with these tools, it's really trying to make it easy for people to share and build a community of IDL developers who might be making routines for ENVI or IDL, and have that be kind of this open source where you have access to the source code for all of this. And so in addition to this, with IDL, it's not just about the package manager. It's also using open source tools directly within an IDL environment. Surprisingly enough, we were at the AGU conference last week, and quite a few people were not aware that we have an IDL Python bridge. The IDL Python bridge is basically a bidirectional bridge where you can call ENVI and IDL from Python, or call Python routines from IDL. In addition to this, if you are an ENVI user, you can use the ENVI Py package to run ENVI tasks through Python without needing to set up the bridge or having other configuration for that to work. You just have to let it know where ENVI is installed, and you can run it. And so just a little fun fact for you, this is the same tool that we use for our ENVI PyArc Python package, which is for our ArcGIS Pro and ArcMap integration, so that you can run our tools directly from those interfaces. And just to give you guys some more examples of how you might be able to use the IDL Python bridge, with such large libraries that are available in Python, if you're a data scientist or familiar with basic machine learning algorithms, something that you might be interested in is using IDL with scikit-learn to pull in different types of classifiers or classification algorithms or regression. Just as an example over here on the left, we can use the random forest classifier from scikit-learn directly in IDL once you have the IDL Python bridge set up. If you have been paying attention to IDL, recently we had some machine learning algorithms added. Random forest was not one of those, so if that's something that you're looking for, you have the ability to access that and use that directly within IDL. Kind of the flip side is if you're a Python programmer, maybe you don't want to have to deal with setting up GDAL or other routines for reading a variety of data formats. This is where you could start up ENVI, open up rasters, and use ENVI for managing that file I/O to run the analytics and other things that you need in Python, which might require a lot of different packages and complex setup to get working. So there are just a couple additional examples. You'll get these slides and the links if you want to take a closer look and give this a whirl yourself. The code on the right is just more pseudocode to give you an idea of what that workflow might look like. And so kind of transitioning from there, talking about existing ways to use open source technologies in ENVI and IDL, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about GitHub and Git. So GitHub is really kind of it's a more application or solution that uses Git for version control behind the scenes. GitHub has a lot of different tools, features, and functionalities. Hopefully most of you are all familiar, but you can manage issues, different branches of code, merge things together, have people approve stuff. It's a whole solution, and it works great for open source development because it is free for open source projects, and it's got a very extensive user base and a number of repositories that are actually present. Behind the scenes, GitHub uses Git for version control. If you've never used Git before, it's a great tool to use. I do not use it with a command line interface. I use a user interface. I like Git Kraken. There's other tools like SourceTree and a couple other open source ones that you can use to interact with it. But I just want to kind of introduce these because they are important concepts for some of the things that we'll be talking about, giving you kind of a fire hose of information. Another thing before we move on, ENVI and IDL, those are both organizations on GitHub, and here are the links to those if you want to go ahead and take a look. We don't have a million things out there, but there's a handful of items that are present, important to take a look at. Some of the stuff might be familiar or important to you. For example, on the ENVI organization, there's the UAV toolkit, which is a tool for pre-processing multispectral, multi-lens data. So you can take a look at that if that's of interest. So I want to talk a little bit about concepts and terminology. For probably the rest of this webinar, if I'm talking about IDL packages, that's going to be synonymous with GitHub repositories. And GitHub repositories, another important concept is that, they're really meant for source code. You can have anything you want in those repositories, but it's really about source code, sharing source code, and source control. So this is important if you're an IDL developer who's wanting to make something for ENVI, because if you're familiar with IDL, you might have to pre-compile your pro code into save files. And so if you have to do that, a great way is when you make a release on GitHub, you can then attach the compiled source code, which will be for a specific version of IDL and forward compatible, but not backwards compatible, if you need to. So just a couple important concepts if you're new to open source and GitHub that I think will help translate some of the different things I'll be talking about. And transitioning a little bit, if I'm a user and I'm looking around on GitHub and I find some cool IDL routines or other stuff that I might want to use, GitHub's a big place. Anyone can contribute code, make a repository. And if we take a step back and think about if anyone can contribute to open source tools, how are you going to know that the code that you download, it works, number one, and is easy to use? And so kind of the solution of this problem, which we're going to be talking through today, is the IDL package creator. Now this is a whole solution for developers and end users to go through and create unit tests, generate documentation from your code, and also compile your code, build that into IDL save files for someone else to use or access, or if you have a private GitHub repository, you can compile that into save files to share for your customers so they are not getting your IP directly in the code. And one of the big reasons that this package just kind of came about is a lot of different use with open source package management tools, such as NPM, which is Node Package Manager for Node.js. Yarn is another package manager for Node.js, and the Angular CLI. The Angular CLI command line interface is a tool when you're working with Angular front-end projects that basically builds different web components for you and makes your development life a lot easier. So this is something that will be open source. It's coming soon. The goal was to have this up for the webinar today. We've got a new process for putting things on GitHub, which takes a little bit longer. So it'll be here in a couple of weeks. And this is also built around GitHub's REST API. And that'll make more sense here in a little bit when I get into it. But to kind of talk about what this does at a higher level, and why this might matter for you, is this IDL package creator. It's got different types of package management. So if you're an ENVI user with a couple of lines of IDL code, just like the IDL package manager, you can pull down a repository, have it set up ENVI extensions and ENVI tasks, and the next time you open up ENVI, you'll have those extensions and tasks available to you. So there's different levels of how you might use this. There's a command line interface and an object-based API for interacting with all this. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, just because that might not apply to everybody. So instead, let's go ahead and move on and talk a little bit about unit tests with the IDL package creator. So this is something that's very important, and there's only, I think, a handful of solutions out there for this with IDL. And so what this is, there's inspired by open source tools called Jasmine and Karma for JavaScript. And so we've got it Sol and Luna. And Sol and Luna are what you use to run tests and write them. So this is a little code snippet example of what your unit tests might look like. They're fairly easy to read. They give you nice little printouts as they're running. The goal is readability. So if you read what the line says, it'll actually tell you what the test is testing and verifying. And this is something that's really important if you are a developer for going through and making sure that you write code that's going to work and be rigorous as you make changes. This also uses IDL's internal profiler, so you can go through and get code coverage and metrics for how fast it runs, how many times it's called, different things like that. And another component of the IDL package creator is documenting or generating documentation. So basically, what you see in the little pictures down below is it takes comments in your source code and turns that into nice HTML files. If you've been in any of the classes recently or online courses, the exact same code base is used to generate those the manuals that are used in the classes as for generating documentation from code. So this, the documentation generation is based on Markdown, uses an open source tool called Pandoc for doing the conversion. And one of the nice things about this is the way that this generates documentation is you can use GitHub's Pages feature of a repository to actually host the doc so that you can go take a look at the examples and see everything online. And so that live example is a link. If you go there, you can take a look and get an idea of what the documentation looks like with tooltips and all sorts of other features as well. Then the last piece before we get into a demo, going through and compiling your packages or collections of code into save files. It's not rocket science, but it is something that can be very repetitive. If you're a traditional IDL developer, you might have to create a new build script every time that you want to compile something and make save files for a customer or a user of yours. And so this is something that just kind of automates that process so you don't have to worry about it and you get everything that you need. And so with that, just a couple notes before we get into our demo. We are going to have some of these packages. The stuff that I'm discussing today is all going to be up on GitHub eventually on either our ENVI or our IDL GitHub organizations. There's a couple of tools out there already. Like I said earlier, there's not a million things, but you can take a look and see how we program and other things like that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the demo. As I mentioned earlier, I'll try to keep an eye on the questions box to see if anyone has any questions as I'm going through things, and I'm happy to elaborate or clarify as I'm going through. And so if you joined the webinar earlier, you might have seen this little demo outline setting up. This is a list of the different items that I'm going to be walking through just to show you how you can use this with the IDL package creator. The first thing that I'm actually going to show is how you can pull down an ENVI-based tool and have different extensions and tasks automatically added to ENVI so that you don't have to go through and do any additional setup. So I'm going to go ahead and reset my IDL session and make everything fresh. And just to show you that this is going to work and not be a little bit of smoke and mirrors, I'm going to go ahead and start up ENVI. And when I start up ENVI, you shouldn't see the extension box that will be added here in a second. And this will take about 15 seconds to open. So we'll give it a second. And let me move ENVI over. So if you look over on the right-hand side of the screen, hopefully most of you are familiar with ENVI. This is the interface. The toolbox is what I'm going to be focusing on, which is over on the right. You'll see that down at the bottom, there is no folder called UAB Toolkit. So that's what we're going to be installing and adding to ENVI today. So I'm going to go ahead and close ENVI back out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the IDL package creator with 2 lines of code to pull down and install the UAV toolkit. So I just need to type C equals IDL PC as a function. I then type c.add, comma, UAV toolkit. I hit enter. And what this is going to do is this is going to search GitHub for a package named UAV toolkit. It'll then pull that down and check to see if there's dependencies, and then it'll let you know that it's installed that package with a specific release tag. Now, if I just reset my session to make sure IDL's path is updated, if I start ENVI back up, and if we give this just another 15 or 20 seconds again, what you should see is that down in the bottom right-hand corner, you will have a folder for the UAV toolkit. And so what this does is when you install, the writer or author of a specific package or repository can go through and add some different hooks that actually tell the package creator to register tasks and ENVI extensions. And so down here, now in the bottom right, you should see UAV toolkit. If I click on band alignment, this will open up the default ENVI interface for tasks and task parameters. So it's kind of a neat way, and this is why this matters for ENVI users, is just tying all the pieces together to make it easy for you to actually go through and take advantage of these tools without needing to be a programmer. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close ENVI and just reset my IDL session to clean things up a little bit. So next, what I'm actually going to do is we're going to take a closer look at a different package, awesome ENVI tools. This is something that'll be posted up on our GitHub page. And I'm going to take a look, and we're going to look at the JSON file that describes the package. We'll talk about running tests at a high level, how you can run them and automate them, generate documentation, and then compile everything into source code. The last thing that we're going to do is kind of an additional feature, which is talking about how you can make your life a lot easier by automatically creating ENVI tasks. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code. Let me bring that over, and let me open up the correct directory here. So if you're not familiar with it, Visual Studio Code is a text editor. It's really much more than a text editor. It's an interactive development environment. You see, I've got a dark theme in my Visual Studio Code. There's a couple nice features about this. There's actually an IDL extension that adds syntax highlighting for all the IDL packages. So that's a great one to have if you are a user of this text editor. But I just wanted to open this up because it has a wide support for many different types of file formats with syntax highlighting. So here I have the package file for the awesome ENVI tools open, and just want to show what this looks like a little bit. So if you've used npm or yarn, some of these tags might look very similar to what you've seen before. In particular, an important section of this is the scripts. So this script section, what this does is it helps you automate simple tasks that you may need to do every time that you make changes to your package or generating documentation, different things that are just kind of busy work that you can automate. So one of the things that's actually very important for us is if you're a commercial company and you're going to be releasing code out into the wild, you have to go through and add copyright notices and let notices about the licenses. And so here, this little add headers, what this does, this section, it just goes through and it adds a header to the very top of every one of my files. That's a very helpful tool, especially if you have a bunch of pro code files, you've got your tests. This will just add it to all of them, so you don't have to worry about it. Same for generating documentation. If you generate documentation, you can automatically have footers that link to your licenses, and we'll show what all that stuff looks like as well here in just a second. And so that's just a quick look at what the JSON file looks like. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at running the unit tests and show you how easy that is. So if I want to open up, and this is more as a developer, so if I want to open up my package for awesome ENVI tools, I don't need to specify the fully qualified path to that directory. Instead, I can just specify the folder name, and it will return the first folder on IDL's search path that matches that. And so with this, what I can do is I can do c.run, and then I can specify test as a string and hit enter. And what this is going to do is go through and it will run all of my different tests. And so I know that's not super exciting, but as a developer, this is a great way to ensure the integrity of your files, make sure that all of your code works. You'll see it'll be decently quick. There's options that you can do to increase the speed. So we've got 12 different files. It's gone through 5. And I can actually show what the results look like while this is finishing. Once this has finished, which it's actually just about done, there's this idl.test.log file that's generated in the repository. And what this does is it contains all the information about the tests that have been executed. It'll let you know at the very top how many of the tests have failed or passed, or how many that there were. So for this, there's 116 different tests. One of the nice features, if you're a developer, is this goes through and it lists information about code coverage, what routines were executed, and it's split up by routine in each file. So this is a great way to figure out if you've got code that's never hit, and maybe there might be chunks of code that you can just take out if they're not used anymore. So this is definitely more on the developer side of things, not as useful or beneficial to most users, but important thing to take note of. So the next thing that I'm just going to walk through quickly is generating documentation. So similar to running tests, if I type this correctly, we can generate documentation very easily. So with a single line of code, this will go through. Let me pull up my browser here. It'll go through, it will parse all the profiles, look at those comments, and convert those into a nice markdown, which is then converted to HTML using Pandoc. And so once it's finished, you'll have something that looks like this. We've got different contexts or contents. So here it's even got the license file, and this is other markdown files that are present. And as a part of this, you can go through, you can add tooltips to all your different routines. So for this, we have a function called awesome.getEnvI. If I click on this, it'll take me directly to the source, so I can read more about that if I would like to. And as I had mentioned before, the documentation that's actually generated from this process is something that works out of the box with GitHub. So in your repository, so I've got GitHub open here just to give you a look at what this looks like online. There's a docs folder, which is generated when you run that command to make documentation. Inside this docs folder is a whole bunch of HTML, some CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. And basically, you can integrate that with GitHub's Pages feature. And when you do that, if I click on this link here, over in the top right of my web page, it'll take you to the hosted version of your documentation, which is online. So this is a link that anybody can look to or take a look at or explore, all kind of provided and built around GitHub. So it's a really nice feature for developers. And as a user, if you're not a developer, this is great too, because if someone makes a package and creates documentation, then this will all be you can put this on GitHub and have an easy way to access this. You can even look at it locally as well. The last little feature, which I don't think I'm going to run, you can go through and you can compile everything into save files. I already did that from this morning, and I'm just going to open up a Windows Explorer file and show you what the output of that looks like. Let's get to the right place here. After you build everything, you have a little folder called dist in your IDL package. And inside of this, there's a zip file with all of the save files, all the dependencies within here. And all those, basically this is at a point where if I wanted to send this to somebody and say, hey, unzip this, put this on IDL search path or ENVI's custom code or extensions directory, they could do that and it will work for them. So if you're a user, this is nice because someone can just send you the zip file and it should all work on your machine. That's always the goal here, is that it works, and then be on your merry way. So the nice thing about this is it zips everything up for you. The reason that all of the contents are zipped up is because you want to minimize the number of duplicate routines on IDL search path. So if everything's in a save file and it's just a directory structure, it's probably going to be on IDL search path, which means that you'll have conflicting versions of routines, which can make development harder. So the last item that I want to show you, which this is more for developers, especially if you're an ENVI developer, is that you can easily create ENVI tasks from source code. So if you're an ENVI programmer, maybe like myself, if you ever have gone through the process of creating an ENVI task, that can be something, it's not hard, definitely not rocket science, but it can be a little bit time consuming, especially initially creating that task file, which describes what you're actually looking at. And so using the package creator, there's a generate method, which we can use to generate an ENVI task from a procedure. So you specify, I want a task from a procedure. We give it the procedure name, which is create awesome tile iterator. And then we can specify the keyword educated guess, and we're going to overwrite because this exists already. And then it makes a task file for you, and it lets you know where that task file is. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to pull up the source code just to show you what the different keywords and parameters are. So there's a decent number of keywords for this routine. If I wanted to write an ENVI task, I would have to make a separate parameter for every one of those. And instead, if I go back over to Visual Studio Code, I can open up the task file for this. And what you'll see, I'm going to scroll through this, go a little slower to make sure it catches up, is there's a default parameter added for every one of the keywords that's actually used in my routine. So this is a great way to accelerate the rate at which you can create ENVI tasks. It's something that I use quite a bit to make my life easier. And so with that, that's kind of all that I really had to go through and demo. I'm going to jump back to a couple slides. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask those in the questions box, and we'll get to those in just a minute. So just a couple slides real quick before we finish up today. First thing is that we wanted to go through and announce we're going to be having a contest for ENVI and IDL and different open source IDL packages. So putting something that you've worked on GitHub or somewhere that anybody can access it. And sort of with this competition, which the additional details and other information about it will be coming soon, if you are a winner from one of the two categories, you'll get free attendance to the ENVI Analytics Symposium, and you'll get the chance to attend, and if you want to present or speak at our VIP Customer Summit, you can do that as well. And so you might be thinking, I'm an IDL user, you know, it's the ENVI Analytics Symposium. The exciting part about that is that VIP Customer Summit is really a place where some of our key customers come and they get the opportunity to provide direct feedback on our products, different things they're working on, and things that can help you out in your day-to-day. So the Customer Summit is a very exciting component of the symposium where you get to have face time with product management and some engineers as well. And so with that, that's all the content that we have today. So with this, there will be a follow-up email which we're going to send out a white paper on open source technologies, and we'll let you know when the packages are available on GitHub. Make sure to keep an eye out on our website for more information about that contest if you're interested in participating.
Great, thanks, Zach. That's a lot of information. So, like Zach said, we're going to take some questions at this time. So if you want to enter them into the questions chat box, go ahead. So the first question is from Augustus. Are these Git repositories being replicated on high-side government networks or only on the internet?
Great question. So for Gus, the repositories are just on the public GitHub, so it's not on the high side. If that's something that you're interested in, you can send me an email and we can see what it might take to get that done. We do have people with clearances if you need to chat with them or if they need to do anything fancy to get that on a different location.
Great. Next question is from Stephen. Is there a central location where developers are putting IDL packages for others to use?
Great question. So right now, there's not necessarily a central location. I'll walk through a little bit about what I do when I'm using packages in GitHub. So when I put something on GitHub, what I've been doing is you can add different topics or tags. So I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but I'm kind of hovering over different items on my screen now. So with these different topics, what I do is I add IDL package as one of them. And if you have IDL package, then that's something that you can actually search GitHub by to discover more of what's out there.
Great. So Jim asks, how long has the IDL Python bridge been in IDL?
The IDL Python bridge has been around for a couple of years now. I think it's been since IDL 8.4, just over 3 years. And that's something that I've used off and on for different projects and using tools in Python.
All right. Sienna asks, can anyone create a package and share it with others?
Yep. So that's one of the great things about using tools like GitHub for hosting your content is when you put something on GitHub, anyone can do that. You just need to have an account, and then you can post to your own profile so other people can go and visit and see, and that's where adding those different topics can help make it easier for others to find your content.
Great. Sean asks, when will the IDL package creator be available?
So as I kind of mentioned during the webinar, we're going through the last steps of our approval process to get that out. Should hopefully be a week or two. Depending on the holidays, it might be after the new year.
All right. So it looks like there's no more questions, so we'll wrap things up. We appreciate everyone's attention on the line, and thank you again, Zach. We'll also have the recording. We recorded this, so we'll have it on our website in the next couple of days at harrisgeospatial.com. And we will send out an email to everybody with the recording and the slide deck and the white paper and some other useful information. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.